Right. I am here with Tim Golas, and he is a partner over at Spurstone. How's it going, Tim?
Doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into some tactical aspects on both the buy and the sell side here. But before we get into that, let's talk about you. Let's talk about your background and how you got started.
Yeah, sure. So as you said, I'm a partner at Spurstone, co-founded the firm with my business partner, Ted DeGroot, all the way back in 2009, sort of post financial collapse. Before that, we were over at UBS. While we were there, we administered stock plans for public companies, sort of Fortune 50. Um, were involved in the administration, and we worked a lot with the executives of those businesses, advising on their stock compensation and structures, such as that. Went through the financial collapse there. Did not enjoy what we saw and experienced on the inside of a Wall Street institution. Felt we could do a better job for clients and the families that we were working with on our own. So we founded Spurstone back in 2009. Um, we're solely owned by Ted and myself. We're in Central Connecticut. We work primarily with, obviously, we have sort of legacy executives that we've worked with and built a skill set with, but we've really built our business more around entrepreneurs and business owners having experienced that life ourselves now for a long time. Some shared pain and joy of that experience. But we work with those families really around helping them build their businesses, build their wealth, protect both of those things for their family and their legacies.
Very cool. Very cool. And this kind of goes really deep into the planning side of
Mm.
things, which I like because a lot of people listening to this often think about being prepared is about preparing the business for an exit. It's not about the person running the
Mm.
business and their finances. So let's start talking about how to prepare for an event like this, where you're getting ready. Let's call it maybe 2, 3 years out. What does that look like, and what are some of the things that you've sort of encountered over the years?
Yeah. I think unfortunately a lot of business owners don't prepare far enough ahead of time. So to your point, 2 to 3 years out, maybe stereotypically more on your larger businesses. Too many people don't think about preparing the business and themselves. We talk about two parallel paths, right? Because I think too many business owners get, in a good way, focused on the business, but they forget about themselves and their personals and their financials to really maximize a deal. And the term we use often is to optimize a deal. But yeah, the 2 to 3 year window out ahead, we like to sit down and talk about the business structure. Do you have the key talent in place to live on after a transaction? Whether or not you want to stay there, really sort of what's your vision for the business, right? And for yourself. And I think those can help you sort of optimize and structure a deal that works best for you, maybe your business partners, your structure, your family, and get to a deal that works best for you. But again, it's going to be digging into the operations of the business, cleaning it up, institutionalizing it is a good term to think about. Um, and then really just getting, all of your sort of ducks in a row, but having a clean and methodical process to get you there. So you don't do what a lot of businesses do, which is get to the finish line and then sort of fail to execute.
Mm, got it. And when we're talking about sort of the two parallels of, an individual, let's say, or a family running a
Yep.
business, there's a lot of movement going on with the boomer generation that's getting ready to sell, more of like the trades businesses that I'm seeing a
Mm.
lot of conversations around. What are some of the like key things that people can actually do today to get themselves ready, like on the personal
Yep.
side for something like this?
Yeah. Maybe before the personal, but you mentioned the trades. We work with quite a few of those, and I think of one specifically. You were just talking about Florida earlier, right? A client of mine that's down in Florida. We've worked with him for a long time, since 2016, and he's thinking about how does he transition his business, right? Is he going to stay in it and transition it to his kids? Is he going to sell it? Um, and as we went through that, he's mentally thinking, how do I get out of this and wind it down? Um, and to your point of how do you prepare for the exit, we went through a process with him, and this was readily a large issue to us when we see it from the outside, but not an issue for him. 60% of his business is from one corporate client,
Mm,
right? One institution. And, we said that's a big issue for a buyer, right? You have to de-risk your business as you go into a sale. Um, so what we're actually talking about with him is potentially acquiring another business or two to start to diversify that line of business. So it's funny when you sort of change your thought process, right? But those things also tie to the personal, even for that individual. What do you want your legacy to be within the business, but also for your family, and for you as an individual. So there's a lot of planning and thought, and consideration, that really should take a long time to go through. So to your point, that's why to us, you really need to run up two parallel paths that go, what are you trying to do from a business level, but also individually. Um, and this may be a multi-generational discussion, right? How do you protect your wealth from estate taxes, income taxes? How do you secure that wealth from bad actors on the outside? And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that, but each of those sort of have pros and cons. So you really need to be educated on what you want to use as a tool to accomplish those things.
yeah. Yeah, I really like that. How to combat the concentration risk is literally just roll up more businesses and you can kind of dilute that 60% customer.
Yes, the look on his face when we talked about it with him was like, "Hang on, wait a minute. This is not the discussion I thought we were going to have." But then when we went through it, he understood like,
Yeah.
okay, this actually makes a lot of sense, and he was in a good position to do it, right? He didn't have a lot of debt. He had a very profitable business as it was. But it was definitely I think he walked away thinking a whole new way about his business, which
Yeah.
is good.
Yeah, that's a really funny conversation to have where he's all of a sudden like, wait, I was the one that was going to be getting bought, I thought.
Right,
It's a quick
right.
little flip flop there, but really great
Yep.
knowledge nugget there of like people listening that potentially have some concentration risk. Uh, that is a good route to take is just even buying uh, even another company that has a concentration risk, rolling that into yours, making it a little bit more balanced, is pretty great. So let's shift to timing. I think when you talk about multi-generational, that's super key for a lot of people listening to this about how they can protect, move things through their generations and
Mhm.
generational wealth as sort of the buzzword there. But when's the right time to sell? Everybody's different, every business is different, but in your experience over the last decade or so, when's the right time to sell a business?
That's such a difficult question to answer, because it's so case specific,
Uh-huh.
right? But I can tell you sort of sometimes when it's not the right time, right? Like you don't want to be forced into a situation. Again, just advising the families that we deal with, you set up buy sell structures, right, for owners in case a partner passes away, and we've been a part of those, and even those in the best of environments are very contentious, and they can turn into litigation, right? And that's just added headache and cost. So it's first sort of, I think it was Charlie Munger that talks about like, figure out where you don't want to be first and then back into that. And that's one of those examples. You don't want to be forced into it because of a death or a disability or a divorce or something like that. Um, and another one that I think you mentioned earlier, boomers, to use an industry term now. I think a lot of people almost wait too long, right? Like they have these wonderful businesses, and don't get me wrong, sometimes it makes a lot of sense to keep a business, right? You don't want to sell it just because somebody's telling you to, or brokers are telling you that it's really valuable. Um, but if you have a business and you're getting into your 60s, 70s, and especially if that business is reliant upon you, or you don't have heirs to take over that business that can actually drive the business, right? Because the odds of having an heir that can drive the business is actually pretty low. Um, you don't want to find yourself being in your 80s because that can actually drive down the value of your business, right? So it's almost like you want to get out ahead of it as opposed to wait. to the exact right time to maximize it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense how like sort of even age as you sort of get older, you kind of aren't as in a strong leverage point to be selling. So it's almost like when you're in your prime growth trajectory and you're sort of ready ready to go on the personal side, on the business
Mm.
side, everything is aligned. The stars are aligned, but as I know from personal experience, they never are perfectly aligned. So
100%. Yeah, and that's the illusion that I think a lot of people have out there is that there's just this perfect situation that will align itself and fall into my lap.
mhm.
It's again, that's why we use the term to optimize, because there's no perfect maximum that you're going to exit this thing and say, boy, that just worked perfect, and every other thing, because you're always even going to second guess yourself. Like when we first talk with owners, I tell them you might be disappointed if you sell the business, but you also might be disappointed if you don't sell the business. You know what I mean? Like you're always going to sort of think about what could have been on the other side. You just want to put together the right opportunity for you and your family.
Yeah, and I remember some advice I got for my first exit. I was really just kind of shell shocked from the whole thing, and everybody in the company was as well. It was just a crazy experience. And one of my mentors at the time, when we were thinking about doing it, and it was like kind of progressing, he was just like, "Do you think you're going to start another business one day?" And just that like simple question, I was like, "Yeah, I am. So I'm just going to do this, check this off, and then go on to the next thing." And
Mm.
just, as we were talking about with age and chapters of your life, like as a younger entrepreneur just starting out back then, it really was meaningful at the time to just realize like, okay, yeah, there is a future of other opportunities out there. Like it's not just
Right.
this one sort of thing that I think Mark Zuckerberg notoriously turning down $1 billion changed a lot of young entrepreneurs' minds where they're like, oh, I could take this thing for, to the $1 billion mark when they have millions of dollars in an offer in front of them is just, yeah, it's not always rainbows and bright shiny days on the
Mm.
on the sell
And
side.
especially if it's a family business too, you can feel a lot of pressure in both directions. Like you can feel a lot of pressure to sell because it creates liquidity for other family members,
Mm,
right? You could also feel a lot of pressure to carry on the legacy that maybe your family had before you, right? To carry, hey, it was always the vision that I'm going to be the person that would carry this business forward for my parents, for instance, right? So it is a deeply emotional process for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about valuation. I think that touching on how to sort of get everything prepared, whether that's, the parallel of personal and the business side. We talked a
Mm.
little bit about timing. I think stepping forward into the process to get the valuation. What, in your experience on the sell side specifically, we could talk about the buy side after, but like with the sellers out there that are listening, what are some things that they could do today that would maximize that valuation?
Yeah, sure. I think it goes back a lot to what we just talked about. Some of the things that'll drive multiple at its core is de-risking your business, and you want to try to take a look from the other side of the table, right? When I had that conversation with the client I was talking about earlier, I say, if I'm coming in to buy your business, this is a huge risk. I'm
Mm,
not going to pay you a large multiple on that, right? Um, and having a vision and a plan for your business itself is critical there so that your team can know what's going to happen post sale, right? What type of a buyer do we want to be associated with? What type of an exit do we want to structure, right? So again, it's about sort of having a process to go through, but some of the big ones definitely are de-risking, making sure that you don't have hanging litigation over your head. If you're a manufacturing business, do we own the property underneath? Do we have risk associated with that so that we can be realistic about that situation. Um, and the comment I said before is institutionalizing. So don't have your personal finances tied up in the business. Understand the difference between EBITDA and normalized EBITDA, right? But yeah, de-risking is a huge process and concept to understand for sellers.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about mistakes. What are some of the biggest mistakes or most common mistakes that you've seen over the years?
Sure. I think one of the most common really is people planning an exit when they have an LOI on their desk, right? When the LOI shows up and they say, "Oh, how do I get the most value from this?" Um, Oftentimes that's too late, and then now they're negotiating that one LOI as opposed to potentially going to market, going through a process that could get them a better deal structure. So that's a common one for sure is just waiting too long to go through and plan your exit. Um, and tied to that to us, it's you should have a methodical long-term process to go through to prepare your business. For us, I shouldn't say we do have a process that has 5 different stages. It starts with your vision, it goes through to make sure that are you ready as a business? What type of a deal structure do we want to build? So having a methodical process is something that the vast majority of businesses don't have. They sort of just wait till the LOI shows up and hope that they can get some good value out of that. Uh, Waiting and hoping you've worked too long, too hard on a business to just deal with the one LOI that shows up on your desk.
Yeah. And I think that valuation often is a hang up for a lot of people when they go to market and they start seeing the reality of the valuation. I think that just the emotional roller coaster of that can really throw people just in a whole different direction. And personally, and a lot of the people that I know that have gone through it, it's quite the gauntlet of emotional um, sort of trials and tribulations because when you're doing something for a very long time, you're emotionally attached to it. You built this thing up, and it's basically like a kind of devaluing over time the longer you're on market, and it's just a
Mm.
tough game. So let's talk about the buy side because you've worked with both, and I know that you're mainly focused on entrepreneurs and the sell side. But in your experience on the buy side, what are people looking at mostly now? Like, what is their key metric? Is it EBITDA or the multiples on, top line? What are you seeing?
Yeah. EBITDA is always the talked about item for sure, and to your comment before, it's where I think a lot of sellers also get lost is saying, oh, my business is worth $3 million, but they're not paying attention to the deal terms. The terms to me are more important than the top line number. It's like, what can you actually get out of the deal as opposed to the number at the top?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so it's similar on the buy side in our experience. It just depends on the type of business that they're looking for. EBITDA is important. Um, Maybe if you're in a mature business with a lower growth rate, right? You're looking at a manufacturing business that might be more important than, for instance, software business. Not to flip to the other side, but we have a client that we sold the business for earlier last year, and there was zero EBITDA consideration in the deal. Um, uh, Interestingly, so this is what the buyer said to us, right? We're not worried about the EBITDA. And then as we're going through the negotiation process, all of a sudden they become concerned about the EBITDA, which we were fortunate to discuss ahead of time and deal with that. But that's how it can affect deal terms, right? All of a sudden your deal terms have EBITDA components, and it's like, no, thank you. We already said that wasn't going to be a part of the deal. So yeah, it's just similar on the opposite side of the direction.
Yeah. There was a famous phrase that was brought up on the pod once. It was called the fish and chip method. So, fishing with a very large valuation, getting the LOI in place, and then chipping away at
Hmm.
the value. And
Yeah.
can't take credit for that saying, but it is so accurate on the M&A.
But to your point, that's what, and maybe this goes back to your question before, a common thing that sellers aren't realizing is that you need to negotiate your LOI,
Mhm.
right? And negotiate it prudently and aggressively because at the end of the day, that's likely to be the best case scenario
Yeah. Yep.
because they're going to do exactly what you just said, which is fish and chip, right? And I always, again, I always tell sellers, it's like, listen, I'll pay you $1 billion for your business that's only doing, $1 million of EBITDA, but I'll put the most crazy terms on it that you're never going to get the $1 billion. So who cares about that number? You need to have a number that's realistic and a deal that's realistic.
Yeah. So we talked briefly about the trades, which I'm super interested in now. A lot of people are talking about it with this large kind of tranche of people retiring, passing that down or selling it or winding it down as really the options. What are you seeing in terms of trends? Like, what is the sort of hot topic when you're coming in every day and you guys are talking about deals, you're talking about the clients that you represent. What are some common themes that you're seeing here, and what can we see in 2026?
Yeah, it's been a lot of what you probably see on the news. We're Central Connecticut. We deal with clients all over the U.S., but we just because of our location, we wind up with a higher concentration of individuals here in Connecticut or business owners. Um, and we tend to have a lot of manufacturing businesses here in Connecticut. We have some software businesses and things like that, pharma. But it's the stereotype is true, which is your 65 to 70-year-old manufacturing business owner. They've done it. They've done it well. It's a 20, 40, $80 million business, which is great. But they're now trying to figure out what I talked about before, which is, are the kids going to take this thing over? Or should we maybe just move it along? And there tends to be a lot of private equity
Mm,
activity in that space specifically. Um, there's a lot of competition now in those spaces because I think private equity is realizing there's a lot of value in those.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I've heard similar things about all these different sort of specialized roll-ups and stuff like that that are happening all over the
Mm.
US specifically, but I'm assuming they're global at this point, just kind of with such a large population of people retiring, it's a inevitable that profit's going to be found, right?
Yeah. And when you hear about these trillions and trillions of dollars that are coming down from the boomers, a very large percentage of it is equity in businesses.
Mm,
Right? I mean, I think the average business owner, 80% of their net worth is tied up in the business, right? So that's a big component that those individuals and families need to deal with. And it just gets more complex when you have a lot of business owners or family members in the same business.
yeah, yeah. Well, that takes us to the finale. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell Tim 10 years ago?
Um, Partners matter and details matter. We've been through very complex transactions that started out very simple, so making sure that you have the right people on your team. Um, and at the end of the day, and I've always felt this way, and when we talk with individuals, when we start with them, we want them to know this is we want the most genuine people at the table. We and our partners have sat down with owners at the end, at the finish line, and said, "This isn't the right deal. I think you need to not do this." Right? So you need the right people that can be true confidants to you as individuals, and to me, at the end of the day, that's what's going to stand up. And when people bump into, sort of, here's my litmus test when I talk with people is when they bump into my kids, I want them to say, "Hey, I know your dad. He's a good guy."
Mhm.
And if that's like the first filter we can have, then we can talk about whether or not we did work together. Um, but I think having the right people at the table with you to start is such a huge advantage. And be patient. If you've got a great business and a great asset, you can sell it when the time's right. Yeah,
Well said. So that takes us to what you're doing today. Can you tell us a little bit about Spurstone and what you're working on?
sure. As I mentioned before, we're We're a registered investment advisor. We work with families through all different phases of their wealth and finances and things like that. Um, the big gap that ties here that we've seen in the space is there's a lot of, um, I don't mean this as a derogatory term, but transactional individuals in the space. There's plenty of people that'll sell your business. There's plenty of people that will do the accounting at the transaction or, the legal work. To us, it's about having that methodical process that goes on for the 18 months before you sell, to be thoughtful about having a plan for your business and for yourself individually. So we've built a whole program around that specifically that will take individuals who sort of say, "Hey, look, I think we're getting ready to sell. I want to, I know where we want to be, but I don't know how ugly that valley is in between, right? I don't know the steps that I have to take and who else should be at the table with us to make sure that we get that done and optimize a deal." So we built it. It's called the Grind to Good Life program, to walk people through that process methodically and help them get to a deal that works for them, and that they maximize that deal.
Very cool. And where can people
Yep.
learn more?
Spurstone.com. That program specifically is spurstone.com/grind to good life. And it's just dashes in between grind to good life. If they want to learn more about the program or talk to us.
Right on. Well, thank you so
Cool.
much for coming on and sharing all your wisdom. Wherever you guys are listening on iTunes or Spotify, the links that Tim mentioned will be in the show notes. But thanks again, Tim.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.